20th, 2020. Will you please call the roll? Present. Please stand for the pledge of allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. All right, we're going to go straight in. We have a lot on our agenda tonight to discuss. So we're going to go straight in for our first discussion item, which is 6.0, and that's the appointment of a board representative at the OSBA Student Achievement Liaison. Superintendent Ronan.
Oh, yes. We did discover that when we looked at all the board assignments, that one had been overlooked. So we were hoping that the board would let us know whom they would like to represent us on OSBA.
I've had emails being sent to me as the student liaison for a while. I didn't know if someone had put my name down for it or not, but I've been getting those emails for a little while because I was the representative going to different.
I think that's a lovely
like
choice.
That sounds like a motion to me.
I mean, I'm fine to continue receiving those emails from OSBA if you guys are, but I've been getting them for a while.
I guess we just didn't have it officially documented from
That's correct.
the fall meeting. Okay.
So next week we'll have a thing on there where you can motion Amber to do it.
Is that okay? Unless somebody is super excited and really wants to do that role, I'm happy to continue in that capacity if we have meetings again at OSBA.
Anybody have any other wanting to do this? All right, it's yours.
All right.
Perfect.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
So next on our agenda is the Education Committee, and there are a number of discussion topic items here. So
Yes.
we'll start off with Mrs. Reardon.
So we have the Teacher Appreciation Resolution. Any discussion about that? Do you need me to read it?
Well, maybe just mention, in addition to congratulating and thanking all our teachers, mention who our Norwood Teacher of the Year is.
Oh, let me find, it's Mrs. Burton, right?
Yes, correct.
It's the Norwood Teacher of the Year is Mrs. Burton. She's at Norwood View.
Whoop, whoop.
Counselor.
She's a counselor at Norwood View.
She was my math teacher back in the day and was the best math teacher that actually got me to like my classes. I couldn't be so much more proud of her when I saw her name come up on this. She's a fantastic instructor, great counselor. I love her.
Very deserving.
Oh, yes.
So I have some comments to share, but I'm going to wait till next week to share them.
Okay, is that all the discussion on that one? Next one is the COVID-19 resolution. This has a lot of stuff. I think a lot of it is stuff that I discussed in the legislation report from when OSBA had a town hall, and I gave the highlights. The HB 197 and graduation requirements, grading requirements, all sorts of fun stuff. Remote learning opportunities, building closure.
Right, so I do have some questions regarding the student grading system. I mean, because a lot of people are going to get their report cards specifically for the fourth quarter, and it's going to look differently. And I just want to make sure that we're prepared to answer those questions, because they're going to be like, what is this? How does it affect me? I know for the little guys, we're going to go from, a grade to a narrative. How's that going to look?
So we're going to still send home the report card as they've always seen it all year. And this time, instead of the comments being a shorter section, they're going to devote the comments to individually telling about what's occurred during this fourth quarter for that particular student. So the narrative involves, if it was about Christina has been reading such and such during this fourth quarter, she's been working on this, I've had an opportunity to see her work in this area. So they're just going to highlight the kinds of work that particular student has been a part of during this fourth quarter.
Right.
Because not everyone has had quite the same experience for various reasons. And we felt like it was not appropriate to follow the way we typically evaluate fourth quarter because they weren't in session each day.
Right. Okay. Now, what changes, if any, are students at the higher levels going to see on their report card? Because, I know we can't, in fairness of equity, if a student has struggled to have access, so, how is this going to look for like GPA, for like scholarship? This really impacts a lot.
It does, and I know in the discussion and the guidance we've gotten from the Ohio Department of Education, they were saying give them, the student, the higher of their third quarter grade, because that's a pretty good indication of what they've been doing all year until we suddenly were out of school, or the work they've done fourth quarter. Because some students did a lot of work, and certainly if they had a C, deserved to move up to a B.
Right.
But we didn't want a child who's had, let's say, B's and C's all year, fourth quarter comes, they may not have access, and suddenly give them an F was way too punitive. So that was the guidance that most districts in the state of Ohio are using based on the Ohio Department of Education, that says give them what they got third quarter or a higher grade if they've spent the last 8 weeks really, really working hard, but don't fail youngsters, because it really wouldn't be equitable or fair.
Yeah.
And this was communicated to the teachers by the principal.
Okay. Does anybody have any other questions regarding grading? So the other big topic, as it relates to specifically right now, is graduation requirements. And I know House Bill 197 did have a lot of language in it regarding graduation. So from what I understand, and somebody please correct me if I'm wrong, but House Bill 197 really puts the ability to graduate on the shoulders of the high school principal and the superintendent, correct?
Yes, it was really the same kind of guidance. If a student was on track to graduate 8 weeks ago when we were shut down, they should be graduating, as opposed to not graduating because they didn't have internet access or whatever happened. So that's really what the guidance was, and that's what the House Bill 197 said to do, and that's what we have done. If you were on track to graduate, you will be graduating.
So how does this impact, if any, students who may have been on some, what they would call alternative pathways?
I believe that's why they put that in House Bill 197. That was waived. If you were on track 8 weeks ago, then they said you should graduate.
Okay.
Even though, for instance, you're correct, there's maybe community service or some other things that you were supposed to do as part of this alternate pathway, which obviously you couldn't complete because of us being closed down. So that's why they said if you were on track 8 weeks ago, then you should graduate. So we have definitely complied with that, although I do think we may have 1 or 2 students who may not be graduating because they were never on track.
Okay.
So, but I would say 98, 99% of our students are graduating.
Do we have the ability to help any of those students obtain credentialing over the course of summer school before we have our walk in August to get those kids
Certainly.
qualified? Okay.
Certainly, but they weren't on track, so they have a lot to make up, let's just say.
Okay.
That was the issue. But the good news is, we're up there at 98, 99% of our students are graduating.
Wow, that's a high percentage. Do we usually have that high?
I'm going to have to ask Christina, was that the case last year?
We don't. We do, some students rely on that final attempt at an end of course exam, but because that was removed, that stress was also removed. So that allowed for more students to be able to graduate this semester.
Now, just to be clear, that's of the current senior class. That's not what appears on the State of Ohio report card, because they start our graduation rate at 9th grade.
Correct.
And when children disappear or move or we can't find them, that's how it's calculated. So I'm just saying, of our 120 students, 98% of them are graduating. But if that's not what appears on the state report card, that calculation starts 4 years earlier.
Wow.
Right, so whoever enters our building as a 9th grader from the 8th grade, that's who we're targeting as to be graduates of this building.
So even if they move?
So if they move and they transfer to another district, then the other district takes ownership of that student. But if they move and we don't know where they go, they don't notify us.
Yes.
We're the school district of record.
Yes, it's the last, correct.
This is another thing. we
It's
need
the
to-
last district they were in. And we've had issues, for instance, they enroll in a charter school, and maybe the charter school gives them a new state ID number. So now you have one child with 2 ID numbers. Well, one of those state ID numbers will be a dropout. So that
And they'll ding us and
is an
they'll
issue.
say that we're a failing school.
And it's, it's especially hard being right here in the tri-state area where there's movement across state lines.
Right.
And there's state ID numbers. So Kentucky has their own ID numbers, as does Indiana and Ohio, and those numbers don't match. So when you leave Ohio with your ID number, then you go to Kentucky and get another ID number. You hope when they come back that we'll be able to reassign that number, but sometimes, at a school doesn't realize, gives them a new ID number, then the ID number that we had in our database will show up as a dropout because that child disappeared because they got a new ID number. So there's lots of bookkeeping and follow-up that can really impact your graduation rate.
So do they not link that system to Social Security numbers for students?
No, it's a separate, it's just a
Why
made-up.
can't they?
I don't think you're allowed
It'd be too
these
easy.
days. Well, I know, and I think,
Because the way they do it, they get to ding us unrighteously.
yeah. And see, we don't have we don't require Social Security numbers. In fact, it's discouraged anymore, so there is no linkage. So you cannot track children across state lines. So,
Anything they can do to...
So also included in this resolution, this is something that impacted spring sports. So supplemental pay for spring athletics. We are just going to go ahead and in this resolution, just make everybody whole that had a supplemental contract for spring sports. So spring sports started before teams were, assigned, and the coaches started the process before this whole thing happened. And because of that, we're just, through this resolution, we're just going to honor those supplemental contracts and just make them whole. So we're not prorating the spring supplementals, we're just going to pay them as if the entire season happened. Does anybody have any discussion over this item?
I do need to mention our treasurer required that the coaches all document what they have done, just because we know a year from now there'll be auditors and they'll be asking what work was completed. So I know that Julie has all the documentation from all the coaches about what they had done prior to the stoppage.
And they really have had a lot of contact with the students afterwards. Some of them even sent out exercise drills and online training. So I don't feel the least bit of qualms on paying them their full contract.
So this is baseball, softball, track and field,
Tennis.
what other spring sports do we have?
And then our teacher supplementals, like class advisors and things like that are included in there too.
Okay. All right. But overall, I mean, we're not talking about a big, terribly large sum of money. I mean, it's probably, what, less than $20,000?
Right.
And it was already accounted for.
It was already accounted for, it was already in the budget.
And a lot of those
It's already
folks
in
were
the law.
already counting on having that money come spring, and with everybody's work getting cut, I would not want to take away more
No.
money from them.
No. So unfortunate incident, we're just going to make sure everybody stays whole for this and move on. So that's in there. There's a bunch of other stuff in this resolution. So one of the sections in there is about board meetings. So in this resolution, this does talk about the potential for us to have online meetings or some sort of not here, present meetings. So the language of this resolution says that we may decide to do this. It doesn't say that we will do this. I'm of the mindset, I would really like to adhere to the Ohio Open Meetings Act, to be present, to conduct our business. I know how everybody, people may feel differently. That's just how I feel. I think if, we're going to run the business of the school, we should try and do it in person as best as we can. Now, nobody can predict the future, and who knows? It may be a point in time where we can't even do this. I mean, who knows? Nobody knows. And so the language of this resolution allows us the freedom that if we have to decide to do that, we can do that. So, what else is in this resolution?
Well, the third grade reading guarantee we didn't have to do.
That's been
Took
waived.
a lot of stress off our third graders.
Yeah. I know it's not part of the resolution, but I know today there's been a bunch of AP testing going on, and I guess the AP sites have just been crashing left and right. So,
They've had some challenges during this time.
yeah,
That's unfortunate,
yeah.
because I'm sure those students will have to make it up later and reschedule.
All right, so that's it for that resolution. Does anybody else have anything in this that they would like to discuss? Questions, concerns?
There's a couple of things in here, our procurement procedures, which is how we buy things.
Oh, that's right.
Were relaxed. That is a federal guideline, and the auditors are pretty strict with that, so I needed to put it in the resolution, because I remember talking to Mr. Kipp about feeding the children, and he's like, I can't find food, I can't find milk, and he's bound to go to certain vendors that have provided the lowest bid to him. And I said, find milk somewhere. So this resolution will cover me for that you're saying that you agree that we made the right decision. And then I'll just read it. Due to economic unrest and state revenue cuts caused by the pandemic closure of the state, the board is authorizing a hiring freeze effective immediately. No open positions caused by staff resignations will be filled unless required by law or mandated by the superintendent. So that is a hard hiring freeze.
So everybody understands that. If we lose anybody else, so if another teacher, administrator, anybody else finds another job or, whatever reason, leaves the district, we're passing a resolution next week to say that we are not going to replace them as of now. So we are going to figure out how to reshuffle people around and not rehire.
And the reason that we're doing this is because, of course, the state cuts are they're taking a chunk of money away from us that we can't replace. And so we would like to get closer to balancing our budget by a hiring freeze so that we don't have to make further cuts, further reductions in force. That's always the best way to run a school district, is to evaluate each and every open position before you rehire, so that you don't have to do RIFs down the road.
And I do have a question about the cafeteria stuff. I know that there are groups in Cincinnati, like La Soup, that are partnering with local school districts to donate food and supplies en masse for them to get out to families and things like that. I know I'd talked to Mr. Kipp before about turning in some of the other food, like turning it into soups and freezer-friendly meals and things like that. How extensive is his restaurant contact list? Is there any way that maybe we can reach out to our community members with restaurants who might have some overhead bulk meats or dairy products and things like that to get them to donate it to the school? Is there any extra guideline for safety measure, because it's food and perishable items? What can we put out to the community that says, hey, we need these to make sure we are providing for our families? Is there anything we can do to help that message?
I'd get with him about it. I know, I forget who donated the meals at the beginning.
Children's Hospital donated a bunch.
So I know he did that.
I know La Soup donated to Harrison, and several others, and some hospitals and things like that. So I know there are some organizations specifically geared to helping schools stay afloat. And since we are going to try to get this program maintained through at least part of the summer for now, I'd like to work with our community partners as closely as we can for that.
I will directly with him then.
Okay. I'll contact Roger this week and see if we can do that.
Yeah, that'd be
Okay.
great.
All right, anything else about the COVID resolution? All right, Alicia, you're up.
All right, next thing is the Norwood High School Class of 2020. And we have a list, I think it's 125 of them. I counted it a couple times before we came.
So that's wonderful news. So congratulations to our 2020 graduates.
So with this, next week, we'll be officially conferring the diplomas, and we're going to do it at the board meeting next week, and then following that, we'll have something to play, correct?
Yes, around 6:45 after the board meeting is over. It's a slideshow, we've taped our speeches. Every student has a separate page with their senior picture, any awards they've gotten, any scholarships they've gotten. Silhouettes are singing, we have drone footage. It's going to be quite lovely, and it's something our students can keep forever, our virtual graduation, but we're also still on the docket for August 10th, the formal graduation at Centos. So we're so hopeful that 2.5 months from now, things will have changed and we can do that.
Yeah.
But if not, at least they'll have a fabulous virtual graduation and a keepsake forever, which I'm sure at their 25th and 50th reunion, they'll be playing and looking at. That's what they look like back in the day. So we've made it Tina, our high school principal, has really worked very hard. Lots of the staff, one of the staff has a drone and did the footage, and it really will include all the elementary schools where the students went to. So it's very nice. And then there's a couple of speeches.
So I don't know if anybody knows or not, but there's a banner that's going across Montgomery Road right now. The banner was provided by the Roger Hinkle Scholarship Foundation and Annie Bolts, who manages that. And so they hung it up yesterday, and it looks fantastic hanging over there. It's right across Montgomery Road, right there where
Like AB Bonded.
AB Bonded
Like by them.
and Miller Brothers Paint. It looks really nice.
It's huge.
Yeah, and then today the seniors did the cap and gown pickup at the stadium. I know I've seen some videos of that.
It was a drive-by,
Yeah,
exactly.
Drive-through.
Drive-through.
And congratulations to the signing day students. We saw some wonderful photos of that process of where they went door to door for the students who were getting their college sign-ons, and congratulations to all of them for participating in that and for their achievements.
I think the staff's trying to do everything they can to make it special, because we feel so badly for the class of 2020 just across the country with this situation for graduation. But I have to say the staff they've just had some really creative ideas to make it special.
Yeah.
They have, and just as a mother of a senior, I would just like to publicly thank everybody for the effort that this district has made, and the help from Amber to get a prom date, whether we'll have it or not, who knows, but graduation, it just means a lot to me personally, so I just want to publicly thank everybody that has gone out of their way for this.
I know this is a tough, unique year, But I know so many people who look back at it and say, I don't really remember my graduation. 2020 grads are not going to forget their graduation or their senior year. It will be something to look back on and be like, wow, we get to do all this really unique stuff and broke the mold on tradition. And I hope they're able to eventually look back and smile on these events, even if it wasn't quite the best to get it there.
There's a lot of figuring things out on the fly in order to make some things happen. So, and I just appreciate everybody's effort to try and be accommodating and figure things out. I mean, you know, who knew when we started this year, this is where we would be right now? I mean, nobody could have thought that.
Didn't even think so in January.
No.
No.
I didn't think I'd be sitting here with a mask on at a meeting in a gym. So weird.
Socially distanced.
Fogging up my glasses.
But congratulations to the graduating class of 2020.
Yes, congratulations to them for a very memorable graduation. And congratulations, Norwood, for having so many graduates. Very great percentage of graduates. Okay, last thing is we have some textbook adoptions. There's a K through 8 math, core math resource, K through 8 math Eureka math program, 2009, publisher Great Minds. And an AP English language composition course, the language of composition, reading, writing, and rhetoric. La la la. Do you have anything to say about it, Chris?
So the first one, the K adoption, we've been piloting Eureka starting in 3rd grade and then went to 4th and 5th, added 6th through 8th and K to 2 this year. So every group has had a pilot group, and we thought that was important for mathematics in particular. And Great Minds and Eureka is actually an open source program, so you can get access to it. The cost will come when we make consumable workbooks and things like that. We really felt like it matched what we believe, how math should be taught, and matched our standards really well versus other programs that we use. So we chose this to be our main resource. It doesn't mean we won't have some other supplementary materials, but that's our main resource moving forward. And then number 2, the AP English Language and Composition course. As you might remember, that's a new course that we're adding next school year, so they needed a nice textbook that is approved and well-respected, and so we've chosen the one listed there.
Very good. Any comments about the choosing of the textbooks? All right.
That's all for me.
Thank you very much. So let's move on to section 5 of our agenda, and that's personnel. Superintendent Ronan.
Thank you. Under retirements, I'd like to congratulate a 4th grade teacher at Sharpsburg Elementary, Mrs. Martha Messerly. She is leaving us after many, many years, and I hear she was just a very, very beloved teacher. So congratulations to Mrs. Messerly. We also have a resignation. Maggie Tapia, who's an intervention specialist at the high school, has gotten a job at the Hamilton County Education Service Center, where she is going to be doing transition services for students with disabilities in all 23 districts in Hamilton County. So we wish her well, and we'll miss her also.
That's a major loss.
Yes, it is.
So those 2 people leaving us, those are 2 people that we are not replacing.
That is correct.
Go ahead.
Okay, 5.02, employment. The non-renewal of the educational aid, this individual just got left off the list in April. So we caught the error and have added that in. And then Laura Ferguson and Sheila Faust, they have some additional days if they need it. They are working to put all of the arts and dance and all the activities that they were doing in person with young people online, so that this summer when we do our summer school enrichment program, they'll be attached to all these videos. So I want to thank Laura and Sheila. They were on it and got all the artists with whom they work involved, and now we have it online, which is wonderful. So that is what that is for. And I believe that concludes the employment section.
All right, so next we'll move on to agenda item number 6, which is the policy committee. Mrs. Cole.
Thank you, Mr. President. So tonight we have 12 policies that we're going to go over, and I'm going to turn it over to Mrs. Chesson to give us the highlights of these policies.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Cole. The first policy is minutes policy, and really the focus of the changes are about full and accurate and continued transparency for the minutes. And Julie saw this one coming and said that this is the entrance moving forward. They talk about there's a removal of recording motions, but because they say the statement that there's a full and accurate minutes and it has to contain sufficient facts, it won't change our procedures. Julie will always record who makes a motion, who seconds the motion, and how that vote goes, because that is about transparency and that would reflect what really happened during the meeting. So it won't change our process. They've just added in some verbiage that makes it, makes people know how they would like the public to know that we're being more and more transparent with all of the work that you do. The next one, student absences and excuses. This one is really the same, except for they've separated the medically excused listing of why you can miss school from the non-medically excused. So you might see there's a lot of cross-offs, but that's really just a reflection of a reorganization. And the only difference is the way they talk about the term unexcused, and they've changed that term to say without legitimate excuse. So other than that, all of the same reasons still exist. They have added one more notation for the medically excused list that just allows the superintendent to determine another emergency if it doesn't fit the above categories. So again, basically the same policy, just a little bit of reorganization for that. Student attendance and accounting, JEE, is a phrasing change, again, for that unexcused portion. So that's a part of this as well. Career advising adds a cross-reference, and the cross-reference is to a new policy that OSBA has come up with, and that policy is among our list today. So this just simply referenced that. And it also makes a line about developing a student graduation plan, which we see echoed throughout the rest of our policies that we'll talk about in a second. Graduation requirements, you see this policy every 3 months, it seems like. So this policy, we had already made changes to our total number of units. And in your listing, OSBA has a little bit of lag time for when you adopted the policy. Those changes aren't accurately reflected just yet, but it's still what you chose before, which is 20 credits moving forward for next year. But of course, you're planning to adopt the resolution that puts that in place for this year's graduating class. But this other enhancement in this particular policy allows for that cross-reference again to graduation plans. So that's why this one is being brought up again. The next one is school ceremonies, policy and observances for patriotic exercises. There is no change in this policy, but it just reflects that they've been looked at again, and so we're going to adopt it again. But again, no change for us in this particular policy. The next policy is our new one, so we don't have anything to reference for this one. It's the graduation plan policy for students at risk of not qualifying for a high school diploma. So this is a brand new policy. Nothing in here is really something new that we haven't done before. What this policy is saying is every year during the 9th through 12th grade, you make a commitment to talk to students and their families about if a student is at risk of not qualifying for a high school diploma. And we do that a lot through our counseling services at the high school, but this formalizes it a bit more. And it also requires that you have documentation, written documentation each year during those 4 years, so that parents are always aware of the challenge that is in front of their students. So that nothing in here is, again, different than what we do, or we do believe that this is important for students, so we're in agreement with that policy. The next policy is about hazing and bullying. There is the policy and the regulation, and both of those policies talk about the rights of students that are protected under the Constitution, and it specifically calls out that verbiage. And this is something that actually we talked about at the beginning, at first semester, because Julie noticed it when we were working with our auditors, that the auditors really wanted to see that one line called out, that students' rights would be honored based on their First Amendment rights based on the Constitution. So we're readopting that policy, but you will notice it's really no changes from our current policy because we were ahead of the game.
I do have a question about that, the bullying and hazing policies. There wasn't much language in there specifically talking about victims or retaliation or any instance where a child may choose to defend themselves if they're being harassed in a physical form. Typically, punishment is a no tolerance across the board kind of thing. But if a student is being beaten and reacts in such a way, is there any policy that actually defends a victim's right to defend themselves?
So where you'll notice that is during the, I think it's on like page 3, you'll notice at the bottom of page 2 start the legal references, but the top of page 3 show the cross references. So those are all the other policies that deal somewhat with hazing or bullying.
Okay.
So you'll find we do have a student conduct, zero tolerance policy that kind of you're hinting at, student discipline. So all of those other policies work towards that end. And in addition to our policies, remember we have a handbook that outlines some things, and then we certainly have procedures that we work through if a situation arises where someone is, in the instance you described, that has that kind of situation, then we take that always into consideration.
Okay.
But the policies will still remain really general, and then the procedures guide the work, and then when you get into that incident, then you discuss it in more detail and make a good judgment call.
Okay. I just want to make sure that it isn't a blanket. If a student defends themselves against harassment after trying any way to get away from that incident, that child is not then punished for the only logical outcourse at that time. So I wanted to make sure that there were some type of defense in line with that reaction.
That particular, like that kind of a line, I wouldn't see as much in a policy as I would see something hinting at in a handbook, and then again, through the discussion during the discipline incident.
Right, so the principal's discretion during the discussion of what was the circumstance, what happened.
As a former administrator, I know that we are really good at the details of an incident, and we're able to work through that and uncover what really happened and find what happened during that
I know they were back when I was in school, but I want to make sure our parents are aware that even with this policy, if your child is being harassed, that they're going to be fairly heard by our administration if something were to arise where they were in a bad situation and were forced to handle it. Maybe a teacher wasn't nearby to help them escape or something.
Of course.
Thank you.
Sure. The next policy, staff and student relations, which is JM and GBH, and the student conduct policy. Both of those policies, or all three of those policies rather, all reflect the licensure code of professional conduct for Ohio educators changes. So there were changes in that code of conduct for professional licensure, and there have been some legislative requirements, and all three of those are examples of the impact of that. So nothing different than what is part of what we sign off on the licensure code of professional conduct. So those are all in keeping with that spirit. And those are the big policies for this month. Any other questions?
So these are the first reading of these policies. So I just, we want to remind everybody that, our standard operating procedure for this is that we'll do two readings. While we're going through the reading process, these policies will be available for people to read if they wish to do so and comment on. So, but we're, as we're going through this process, we're going to have the first reading next week.
Thank you.
All right. Next, we'll move on to item number 7 in our agenda, which is Building and Grounds Committee. Mrs. Ballard.
Thank you, Mr. President. We have one request for facilities usage. It's a little bit of a unique one. They just need to use our middle school parking lot. Reverend Scott Casebeer from Zion United Church of Christ has reached out to us to borrow the parking lot from beginning in June through the summer as would be required by the government for COVID requirements for churches meeting. Because they cannot have in-person worship services, they would like to set up a drive-in worship in partnership with several of the local smaller churches like Grace United Methodist and a couple others that would partner with them. They're wanting to use a power outlet, but they wouldn't need to set up any speakers or anything like that. They're going to tap into an AM system that would only be heard by the vehicles tuning into their specific station while in the parking lot at that time. It wouldn't necessarily be something that should interfere, but if we have construction, that would be the only issue. If they need access to that parking lot during summer months, if they're not using it on Sundays when they're doing services, as long as we wouldn't have any vehicles in the way, I think this might be an accommodation that we would be able to meet for the community, but we need to work that out with our construction crews in case they need access to anything on that parking lot and how to coordinate that.
Yeah, the only conflict we see is if we blacktop the parking lot, there might be one Sunday that they may not be able to use it, but it depends on what day of the week the blacktop company comes. On a Friday, chances are they couldn't use it on Sunday, but if they did it earlier in the week, so we'll try to work through that. That's the only conflict we see at this time.
And that's the only request at this time, and that concludes my report.
President Atwood, since we're on buildings and grounds, would you mind if I gave just a few updates here with construction?
Absolutely, that'd be fantastic.
Well, I wanted everyone to know that Norwood View moved into the middle school last week, so the move is completed. We have made accommodations for the lunches at Norwood View to be passed out at the church down the street. They have a porch that's covered because we were afraid if we put a table on the lawn in the rain, there could be an issue. And Graybeck has already started the abatement at Norwood View. It has begun already, which is fortunate because we have picked up an extra month. Sharpsburg, we have moved all the materials and the furniture out of the modulars into the primary building. And we have contacted Pac Van to get on their schedule to remove the modulars ASAP. So that's where we are with that. And then speaking of buildings and opening, the state superintendent, Paolo Di Maria, has asked all 600 school districts to be patient in terms of what's happening in August about reopening buildings. I think they're going to give us guidance, they say, in June, because they were very concerned that 600 districts will start planning all kinds of different kinds of startups, and then ODE will tell us, or the governor will tell us that we can't do that, and it'll cause massive confusion. So at this point in time, I just wanted everyone to know we've been told to be patient and wait for the guidance in June. So that's really where all 612 districts in the state of Ohio are at the moment. We're in just wait and see mode until we get guidance from Columbus.
And that's concerning what we're going to do in the fall about, are we going to be in buildings, not be in buildings?
Exactly. Are we going to be in buildings or not? Is it going to be virtual? Is it split schedule? They said, please don't start that planning because they don't want the kind of confusion that happened over graduation, because we got about 5 different directives in a week's time. So they didn't want that kind of confusion to occur over what's happening in August. And even then, I worry, whatever they give us in June, will that still be the case 2 months later in August? So even that guidance could change. So I think we just do have to be patient, because no matter what we plan could easily change. So I just wanted everyone to know, because we've had a number of questions. What's it going to look like? I wish I knew.
It'll look like August.
It'll look like August, exactly. So thank you.
Oh, and I wanted to say, if anybody's walking over to the Creamy Whip over there, the windows going up into Sharpsburg look fantastic.
Yes, they do.
So take a look up, guys, if you're walking by the school, and say goodbye to those glass blocks. They're going away. Yeah, it looks really pretty.
All right, any other comments about buildings and grounds? Nope, let's move on to item number 8 in our agenda, which is the Finance Committee, and I'll turn this over to Mrs. Camphouse.
Thank you, Mr. President. My CFO report and April financial reports are attached for your review. The month was good with revenues exceeding expectations, mostly due to timing. Real estate taxes did come in above expected. We are seeing some savings also on the budget side due to school closure. However, the governor announced last week that he was cutting public education funding effective immediately. Norwood City Schools state funding was cut by $412,626 from this year's state foundation revenues, which is more than a 5% loss for the year. That $412,000 cut will be cut from the last 3 payments from the state this school year, leaving us with very little revenue in May and June for cash flow. I understand the need to make cuts because I certainly don't want to spend into our carryover either. So I understand why the state has to do that. It is just quite a bit of a loss for us when it comes over 3 periods, which is the last part of May and our 2 payments in June. So we'll get very, very little state funding in May and June, and we'll have to pull some of our investments in to cover payroll.
So it's $150,000 about in each foundation payment period.
Yes.
So, and I apologize if I'm cutting you off,
No, you're
but,
fine.
this frustrates me because, there's a lot of school districts across the state that aren't in the same position as us, where, this kind of cut completely kills their cash flow. Like there are some districts in the state that don't know how they're going to make payroll for May and June. Now, we're in a little bit of a fortunate situation because we have been diligent. We have been diligent with our budget.
Right.
And we've been very dedicated on making sure that we have, some sort of cash balance. And we're seeing, that kind of foresight follow through now, but it hurts. And what frustrates me even more is when the state says that the cut is only $212 per student. I mean, that's what it's being reduced. Yeah, that's accurate if that's over a 12-month budget cut, but you didn't cut the budget over 12 months. You cut it over 6 weeks. And frankly, that pisses me off. So.
I'm really grateful that you had the foresight to cut for next year's budgeting already,
Yes.
predicting a 4% cut, and it was dead on what we needed it to be, so at least for next year, it's not going to be as much of a surprise.
Right.
So thank you for having that ability to predict the future in a way that is probably going to help save us as a district.
Well, we all work together, and it certainly is, we're in much better financial shape now than we would have been if we hadn't made those cuts. So, well, I know a staff cut is the worst thing that you can do, cutting staff. It's just traumatic, but we owe it to our taxpayers to spend their money wisely and to balance our budget. So I feel we're on our way for doing that, and we have another hump to climb over, but we'll get through it. 8.02 appropriation resolution attached for your review, which is our current budget for the year. 8.03 estimated resources, that's our current expected revenues for the year. However, there is no attachment as, of course, I did not have reduced state funding on it for this year. So I will have that on there for next year for you to review, or next week for you to review and to approve. And then the next on our list is the forecast. And so I would like to go ahead and do our presentation right now.
All right, I may have to move.
It's really bad.
And then we may need to cut the lights.
There it is.
I don't know how this is going to be seen.
You just want to move over here.
Think he'll be able to zoom in on that?
So I think the TV cameras can zoom in on that.
Yeah.
But I don't know how, with the lights on, how well that's gonna look to everybody else watching.
Well, if our walkers stop moving, maybe the lights will go out.
They'll turn off eventually.
Take a rest.
Can we hit the,
You can see it?
yeah, we need one of the keys. We don't have that.
Linda says you can see it through the camera. It's pretty well.
Let's find out. It's not zoomed in yet on the camera. It's at wide angle.
Facebook and ask people who are watching if they can see it.
And you know, I always put the forecast on our website. I can put the presentation on our website also.
I think that would be good.
Okay.
Yeah, if we can put it on the website.
Can't see it.
Okay, I can do that. So, twice a year, the Norwood City School and all school districts in the state of Ohio have to prepare a 5-year forecast. It's in November and May. This is the update forecast for May. There are 3 things that I want you to take away from this discussion. We're spending more than we bring in every year of the forecast after this year. A substitute levy is planned for November of 2020 to replace the expiring emergency levy at the same revenue amount. And there are a lot of unknowns regarding the revenue in this forecast. But one thing we do know is that we are still a little overstaffed, and that is, we are going to work on that through our hiring freeze. I'm going to review the forecast as usual, explaining the most important revenues and expenditures, and then I will address the elephant in the room, pending state funding cuts, and how it affects our bottom line. Remember, the forecast just estimates the general fund. All other funds are considered self-sufficient or should become self-sufficient. At any time during this presentation, if you have a question, please interrupt me. It's much easier to deal with questions at the time that they come up.
It's zoomed in, so they can't see it at all.
Yeah, I'm looking at it too. It looks good.
Okay.
This is
Okay,
what
good.
they see.
All right.
Thank you, NCT.
Yes. So this first slide compares our November forecast to our May forecast, and this is important just to show continuation. There's not a lot of changes in the forecast, even though when you think about it, we've had some huge changes come up in the 5-month period of time. So the very first part is property tax. The red line is what I thought we would get in November, and the blue line is what we actually received, because we have received our final settlement for property taxes. So as I said before, real estate tax revenues are higher than expected in November. I had expected a refund to a commercial taxpayer. That didn't happen. Unrestricted grants, that's our state revenue, has decreased by more than 5% compared to last year, in the most part due to state funding cuts. All other revenues are just slightly higher than expected in the prior forecast. That's that bottom line, the bottom red and the blue bar. Sources of revenue, I always feel like this pie chart is just a really helpful chart to review every year. Every time I do a forecast, I bring it up, and it just explains the sources of our revenue. So you'll see the dark blue half of the pie, 51%, is real estate tax revenue. That is our major supporter of this school district, is tax revenue. The next one is unrestricted aid, which is our state funding, unrestricted state funding at 23%.
So I just want to make sure that when people see this chart, so the $412,000 that the district was just cut
Yes,
comes directly out of the 23% number.
that's correct.
So what that does is that makes the other sections of the pie chart more heavily weighted, because it's not, you know, the pie, the whole entire pie is shrinking.
Yes.
Which means that the other parts aren't growing.
Yes.
The other parts are just becoming more important to us because the unrestricted aid is shrinking.
That's correct.
If you could, I know all other revenue is our third largest category there. Can you just give a little bit of an explanation of what
Sure.
includes all other revenue?
Sure, and we'll talk about that slide because it is a big portion, that 14%. We'll talk about that in depth a little bit later, but the greatest majority of our all other revenue expenditure or revenue line is TIF revenue.
Right.
And that is for our abated commercial property owners that have special agreements to pay revenue directly to the city, or to the school
To
district.
the school district.
Does this include
this
like
is where
Brookwood?
Yes,
Abatement and TIFs, where we've negotiated to make sure that the school district is made whole.
yes,
That revenue doesn't come through the property tax.
Correct.
It comes through a separate agreement where the property pays us directly.
it comes directly to us rather than through the county auditor, that's correct.
No, grant monies would also fall under all revenue?
No, actually,
Or where does
grants
grant
are
go?
not allowed to be in the general fund, so they're in a different fund entirely.
Okay.
And so that's why at the beginning, that's a good point to bring up, but when I say all other funds should be considered self-sufficient or should become self-sufficient, that's one of the ones I'm talking about is our federal grants and our state grants. Any of those grants that cannot support themselves need to be trimmed so that the general fund doesn't have to transfer money there. So. Okay, so this is real estate tax revenues. This bar graph just shows the history of what we received in real estate tax revenue. This is residential and commercial together. And you'll see some pretty high variances there, and that is due to one-time payments, settlements, and refunds. Because we do have a significant commercial tax base, you do see more often a settlement and refunds and repayments because we are taking our valuations for these commercial properties. We're getting appraisals on them. We're trying to keep those values high to protect our residential tax base from paying higher taxes than they
Correct.
should be.
And so there's a slightly lighter color blue on those bar charts
Yes.
for the other years.
Yes, the lighter blue to the right is estimated, and then like that aqua color at the top is our emergency levy that's expiring. So because the substitute levy that's going to replace that has not been voted by or approved yet by our taxpayers, I'm not allowed to put it in the forecast, but as potential revenue, so that you'll see that's why that's highlighted. And on the forecast itself, on the front page of the forecast, you'll see that 1.7 million at the bottom, where I'm estimating that we hope that that'll be coming in to our coffers in the next couple of years as a replacement of the revenue that's expiring, but it's not been voted on yet.
Right, so without the substitute levy, I mean, you know, if you're looking at years...
Vanna, white this for just a minute, because our viewers at home can't see this.
Yeah,
So this section here in the light blue is if we maintain the levy, we'll stay on target with our budgeting for where we are. If we don't pass that to maintain, it will drop to here. So we'll go from
more than 14 million.
14 million down
less than
to less than 12 million.
Yeah.
Right.
So those numbers are a little hard to read at home, but that's a couple $1 million drop right there.
Yes,
Yeah.
it is.
Stay off to the side if we have to Vanna something.
It's a $3.5 million drop altogether.
Right.
Some of it's going to show up in real estate revenues, some of it's going to show up in tangible revenues, and some of it shows up in homestead and rollback, but altogether it's 3.5 million.
3.5 between here and here.
A total. If you add up the total for all three of those
Sources.
aqua color boxes.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and our substitute levy will be a permanent levy. That's about the only change between the emergency levy and the substitute levy, is that instead of it lasting for 10 years, it'll be permanent.
Now, do you mind me asking, I know we're talking about real estate tax revenue, but can you just kind of, I know you had mentioned earlier that we're spending more than what we're bringing in right now.
Mm-hmm.
Can you just kind of elaborate a little bit more on that?
The major reason for us to need this substitute levy, and the reason that we're spending more than we're bringing in, is because of the loss of tangible personal property tax allocations. And let me just move to that slide. So tax allocation reductions. Tangible personal property tax used to be a tax on equipment and inventory that businesses would pay. And that tax has gone away. Years and years ago, it was removed by legislation. And the state has been giving us allocations since that time. In this graph, you'll see that in fiscal year 13, we received $2,240,000 approximately, and then they started cutting those allocations from the state. And so then it would drop amount, and then it would drop some more. So as of this year, we're receiving $150,000, next year $100,000, and the following year we'll be at $50,000. And then tangible personal property tax will be completely gone, when we used to receive $2,240,000 every single year from the state as a direct revenue source, because they did away with the tax revenue. So because of this, we have to have this emergency levy substituted so that it would become a steady revenue source for us to make up for this tax and allocation the state cut.
So this shows a 10-year gap between 2013, when they started doing the cuts, as it went down. This is fiscal year 23. After that, it's zero.
Yep.
We don't get it again. But we're currently here. We have received the funds for 2020.
Yes.
So this was at what number?
100,000.
100,000. So then we'll go to 50.
And then the last one's 50, and then that last one, that represents zero right there.
Okay.
So if the levy is passed, how much of that would that make up for? So we're getting 150,000 this year, would the levy, cover more than that though?
No, the
Would it
levy.
be this level, or what level would that
Would
put
it
us
take
at?
us back up to
No,
fiscal year 18, or where would it be comparable?
So that money is going to be gone.
Right.
And we won't see that funding anymore. But remember, the substitute levy is the same amount of money that we're already getting in an emergency tax levy. So it's not that we're asking for our taxpayers to give us more to make up for what the cuts have come from the state. We're asking the taxpayers to pay the same amount. We were calling emergency levy, now we're calling it a substitute levy, but it is the same amount of money. So it is not making up for a loss as much as it is, please keep your part stable so that we can deal with the state's cuts. Does that make sense, the way I said it?
So this is going to exist no matter what, like this
That's
just
right.
is no matter what.
That's right.
Right, every school
Lost
district,
this money.
every school district in the state that has seen some sort of revenue from tangible personal property is having that eliminated.
Yes.
Right, so the state's taking those tax revenue dollars and they're putting them into other buckets. It's not going to be this bucket for the schools, we're just losing this completely.
Right.
And because of this makes the other revenue sources that much more important to us. Incredibly important to us. And so the substitute levy is not going to generate any new dollars. We're just trying to figure out a way to stay afloat and then be responsible by trimming our budget as much as we can in order to keep ourselves fiscally sustainable.
Right.
That's the way that I see this.
Right. In a world of crazy variances on the state revenue side, we need our local taxes to stay stable, and that's what we're asking for in this substitute levy in November. Keep our taxes stable, same amount. Are there any more questions on the tax allocations? All right, I'm going to go back and see, we talked about real estate, state revenue. So this is a part of state revenue that's called state foundation. There are two major sources of state revenue that we receive now. One, state revenue foundation. The other one is our state tax allocations, of which we were talking about TPP allocations. So this is the foundation revenue where we're actually paid on a per student basis. And in the darker blue bars, you'll see some variances. That's our actual history of what we receive from the state. And then the first lighter blue bar is 2020, that's this year. And you'll see that drop where we've received 5% less than the year before. And then you'll see each year from there out, for 2 years, I'm predicting another 4% cut each year. Until finally you see this large jump, which is, Mary and I were kind of laughing about it, saying that we'll be thankful to get back up to this amount. But you have to realize in 2023, I'm predicting that we'll still have less than in fiscal year 19, which is last year. And what happens in those 5 years of inflationary cost? Our costs are going to continue to go up. For heaven's sakes, we're air conditioning the entire district for our students' comfort. And lots of other things will be happening that will cost us more money. But in that 5-year period of time from the state, we'll be happy to get back to prior year funding levels.
So Julie, you said you're estimating 4%, but when do we know? Like, when will the governor tell you?
Right, and he just told us last week that he was cutting this year, and we've not heard when will they cut next year. We don't know the amount yet. I don't know what percentage we'll lose next year. We have been told we probably will see cuts. He would like to look at May's revenues, so we have to get all the way through May, take a week for them to process those revenues and do their paperwork, and then they'll review it. So I would think by the end of June, mid to end of June, we should hear something from the state indicating what our cut will be next year.
Do you think that cut will be compounded with the cut they just did? Or
Yes.
will they base it off the original amount? So
No, I think it'll be compounded. I think when we receive a cut, I think they're going to say, this year, your cut's going to be this amount. And then the next year, they're going to say, this year, your cut is going to be this amount. So it'll be 3 separate reductions in state
You have to also remember that the state is under some restrictions, that they can't cut educational funding more than a certain percentage at a time. And I think it's based off of like a 3-year average.
That's correct.
Of funding. So the fact that they made the first cut for fiscal year 20 and took it out in the last 6 weeks, what that does is that drops the 3-year average, so they can make a bigger cut next year.
So that explains then why 2023 goes back up.
Well, I mean, 2023 is kind of what...
That's just an estimate.
That's just an estimate of when the state will say, well, we're going to bring everybody back up.
Right.
We've gone through the whole COVID crisis, and, we've shored up, where the state's been hurting in other places.
Right.
And we're going to give that money back. But what frustrates me about this graph is the fact that it's not bringing us whole when you count inflationary funding.
Right.
Right? I mean, because things aren't going to get cheaper. Health insurance is going to get more expensive. Salaries are going to continue to increase.
Right.
Your utilities are going to continue to increase. None of that's going to get cheaper.
Right. Right. That's exactly right. And you can see from our history too, that's why I like having history in here. From the history, we had 2 years that were up a little bit, and otherwise it's just stagnant. So it's not like we were funded properly and then we needed to make a 4% cut. It's always been, for years, it's just been flat funded.
Yeah. Also keep in mind that the school district is on what's called a guarantee. So we're funded at a certain number of students, regardless of whether we're at that number or not.
Right.
So if, let's say, we were to gain another 100 students into the district,
it'd still fall under the guarantee.
we wouldn't get another dime from the
Right.
state. So,
But we'd have 100 new students to find classrooms for, to find teachers for,
correct.
resources for, and lunch for.
Right.
Yeah.
But,
exactly right.
I mean, honestly, to me, I'd rather the 100 kids.
I would too. I just want to make sure we've got the resources to
Right.
service them appropriately.
And thankfully, the Board of Education has always been very conservative, and we spend our money wisely, and we do have a 120-day cash balance, which I'm very happy to say that, we have a slight cushion to help us with some of these issues, but it's a slight cushion. It's not going to get us through 3 years of state cuts, that's for certain. One other thing I need to say on this slide is state revenue in this forecast is estimated using current law with estimated applied percentage reductions. If the reductions are deeper than estimated, it could cause a material variance, at which time I'd need to restate the forecast. We already talked about TPP. This source is the last source of revenue. It's called other revenues, and the largest payment that comes in here is payment in lieu of taxes, or TIF revenue is what we call it. In fiscal year 19, the district received $1,713,000 in TIF payments from area business taxpayers. After challenging the values of some of those properties, we expect $2,808,000 in annual TIF revenue for fiscal year 20. It's important to note in fiscal year 20, you'll see that large jump in that light blue bar. That's this year. It's important to note that $587,000 of that bar of this year's revenue was due last year, but did not come this year. You will see that late payment is not continued in future years, because of course I wouldn't do that. It should have been here last year, so I'm not going to continue it at that high amount. It looks like maybe we received cuts there also. It's not a cut, it's just timing.
So basically, about this much of it should have been paid here, which would have leveled this out.
Exactly.
Okay.
So you'd see that's stable also. There's not a lot of growth there either. Is there any questions on other revenue?
So a lot of this is really tied to economic development.
Yes.
Within the city. So as future economic development happens, it will greatly impact this portion of our revenue stream.
That's right.
Okay.
And I do not, I estimate the revenues for what our current abatements and TIFs are.
Right.
But I don't have any idea what future ones would be, so of course they're not in there. We would have to restate that as the forecast, at the time period, the forecast of that forecast. Moving on to expenditures. This is the comparison of November's forecast to May for just expenditures. The first one is personnel services. You'll see the dark blue line went down just a little bit as we, payroll and benefits both decreased as we don't replace open positions as people leave us. Purchase services dropped due to the pandemic closure of school. It's not as expensive to heat and cool. Yes, and purchase services, our utilities went down. Our transportation went down a little bit. Of course, we don't need any teacher subs. That went down. Supplies went up a little bit as we needed additional STEM supplies for our new STEM program, and some additional technology needs. Software is included as a supply. Capital outlay increased a little bit as we spend the transferred money from our abandoned students' accounts for the high school sign. So overall, in expenditures, we're seeing some savings compared to the November forecast. Another pie graph, this is the breakdown of our expenditures. So the dark blue, a little more than half of our pie is salaries. We are a service-oriented business. So of course, our most expensive line items are going to be personnel and benefits to pay for our teachers and the rest of our staff. Together with salaries and benefits, that's 74% of our budget. Purchase services come in at 21%. Capital outlay has a very small imprint on the general fund and forecast due to the fact that we have a permanent improvement levy that covers all of our technology needs and taking care of our buildings.
So it's been my experience on that, for a service-oriented business, that if your personnel costs are at let's say a 70% level, that should mean that you're financially, fiscally sustainable.
Yes.
If it gets to 80% or above, I mean, that's where you really struggle to maintain yourself.
I agree.
Do you agree with that?
Yes, I do. I agree with that. In addition, when you think about it, we're a small district, so some of our purchase services would be considered payroll and benefits and personnel if we were in a larger district. So, yes, I definitely agree with that.
Yeah. And then purchase services also includes what we spend for special needs.
Yes. Trying to think what my numbers are. 25% of purchase services is special education contracted costs for students who are actually too handicapped to be in our buildings. And those costs, the services that we provide to those children are required by an IEP that's mandated by the state. And then another 20% of purchase services is our school choice, also mandated by the state. So 45% of that category is mandated by the state. Personnel services, again, the dark blue line is actual, the light blue lines are estimated. You'll see that second light blue line in 2021. That's where you'll see the savings from our layoffs and our hiring freeze in 21. I will say that I do not have any additional reductions to staffing in the forecast. So any future resignations or retirements that we see will be additional savings over and above what the forecast states.
Okay.
Benefits, fringe benefits make up 18% of the district's total budget. We saw a 10% increase in health insurance premiums last year, a 2.2% increase this year, and expect a 4% next year. After that, I expect 10% because somebody has to pay for COVID. All of our employees currently pay at least 20% of premiums for their health insurance. And you'll also notice that in 2021, you'll see the effects of staff reductions on the benefits side. This is what we were just talking about. Purchase services make up 21% of the budget, 25% is used for special education contracted costs, and 20% is for school choice. A smaller amount of this budget includes transportation, cleaning services, and utilities, all of which are well controlled, and we work really hard to manage those costs. So this slide is on the state funding reductions, and again, you'll see in the dark blue line, that is our actual state revenue, unrestricted state revenue for the past several years, and then the light blue bars show what I thought we would see in state reductions. Again, this is my estimate. This year's been projected by the governor, but the next 2 years have not. And so then in the numbers graph underneath that, you'll see that this year, 2020, a 6.8% decline, which is the 4.12 that the governor announced, plus we saw some reduction in a few other costs, a few other revenue sources like preschool funding and transportation funding. So altogether, that's 6.8% down this year, and I projected 4.7 the next 2 years. Then on this next slide, you'll see the results. What does that do to our bottom line? If we reduce this year by the 6%, next year by 4.7 and the 4.7. So you'll see if you go down to the revenue surplus or deficit line that we're positive this year, it's the one above that, not the dark one, but 2 above that. Yep.
These two up.
Yeah. That one, it starts off with the black 479 and then it goes to the red 569. That means next year we'll be spending into our carryover by 569,000, and the following year we'll be spending into our carryover by 557,000. And that includes our substitute levy. So if the substitute levy by some chance would not pass, then underneath the black line is where we would be, which would be spending into our carryover 2.3 million the year after next.
So with this graph where we're looking at our bottom line, so keep in mind, we changed our policy to the administration that when we drop to a level, a cash balance level that's equivalent to 3 months worth of expenditures, that we ask the administration to come to us with a plan to keep ourselves afloat. So And I'm going to be honest with you, we hit that number in fiscal year '21. And that's with the substitute levy. So anything below that, I mean, we really have to look long and hard at our expenditures.
Yes. We'll definitely be watching the bottom line on those years. You know, I feel like the next one I'm going to talk about is a 10% cut in state funding. And we'll talk about that in more depth, but while we're on this 4.7% slide, I want to talk about that. I would advise the board, it's my opinion, that we should just move forward with the hiring freeze for now. That's why it's on the agenda. That's what I want to see happen. That we'll see how much we can save over the next year. We'll see what the governor announces in budget cuts. But if the budget cut does come back from the state to lose 10% of our state funding, we're going to have to make some harder choices. We just can't get through that kind of a revenue reduction.
Right, and so since we're talking about that line of fiscal thinking, so the longer that we wait to really discuss those harder choices, because we don't know what's going to happen. We have no idea, we don't have a crystal ball. But if the state comes back with a heavier cut moving down the line, and that really puts an impact on these bottom line numbers, the longer that we wait, the more money it costs us. Right, so if you rip the Band-Aid off sooner rather than later, you kind of save yourself at the end of the road. Right, it's less of a hole that you have to dig yourself out of.
Right.
But if you wait to make those hard decisions, and nobody knows what's going to happen, the deeper the hole. Like if we don't do anything and they cut 10%, I mean, look at those numbers.
Right. So if we do see a 10% cut in fiscal year 21, we'll be spending $914,000 more than we bring in 2022, 1.3. I can't read from there. 1.207, is that what it says?
Fiscal year 21.
Fiscal year 21?
Yeah.
At which line, I'm sorry?
The next one, fiscal year 22. 20 is 914. It's 1.207, I think.
Yeah, 1,207,246.
Yeah, so over that 2-year period of time, we're losing 2.2 million of our cash reserves. And that does put us within, lower than our 90-day cash reserve policy.
Yeah.
So like I said at the beginning of the forecast presentation, there are a lot of unknowns in this forecast. And we're going to roll with punches. We're going to wait and see what the governor says at the end of June. And then we're going to see how much we can save over the next year. But we'll be talking again. I may have to revise the forecast.
I hope they don't get the 10%. That's going to devastate a lot of districts.
Well, yeah.
Yes.
So, and I just want to share this with the board, and I want to remind my fellow colleagues that the last 2 years that Julie's done the forecast, I mean, she's been within 0.5% of estimated versus actual. I mean, it's almost like she has a crystal ball. So, putting these numbers up here, I mean, I have a lot of faith in what she's putting in this presentation for us to kind of expect, because, past performance predicts future behavior, and, if your forecasting has been as accurate the last 2 years, as accurate now, I mean, we really have some really difficult decisions to make moving forward.
We do. And I work really hard on the forecast. I mean, all treasurers do. And I'm telling you what I don't know. I don't know what the state's gonna say. So I'm just gonna keep it in mind and move forward. Is there anything else about the forecast?
Is that the only presentation?
Yes.
Okay.
On the warm front moving in on Tuesday.
Okay, moving back to the agenda. 8.05 is the resolution declaring transportation impractical. These are the typical private schools that we declare transportation impractical for. 8.06, insurance rates for next year. These rates will be the same as last year. That's our property, fleet, and liability rates. 8.07, the creation of a new fund. This is a fundraiser account for our Captain's Council. 8.08, resolution determining to proceed with the submission of a substitute tax levy. In the forecast presentation, I pointed out the reasons we need to continue the old emergency levy passed in November of 2011. With the state's complete discontinuance of tangible personal property tax allocations, we simply cannot cut enough to exist without this levy. This resolution will be the last board action before putting the substitute levy on the ballot for November 3rd, 2020. Again, please know that this levy is for the same amount of revenue as the emergency levy passed in 2011.
Yeah, so last month, we declared our need, did a declaration of necessity. We have had constituents within the city come forward and heard our declaration of need and has started a committee to support this initiative. And so they're going to be working with the administration to have a formal campaign for it. We'll support them as we can. The administration will work with them. But if anybody wants to be a part of that committee, the chairperson for it is Sarah Horsley, and the treasurer for that initiative is Donna Lake.
.09 on the agenda, recruitment strategies contract. This company will guide Norwood City Schools as we try to recruit and retain Norwood families and build our student enrollment. 8.10, Donald and McCarthy copier contract. Our technology coordinator, Randall Grandstaff, did a great job on this request for proposal process. We had 9 copier vendors offer bids for our 5-year agreement. We are accepting the lowest bidder, Donald and McCarthy, and will see almost $20,000 in savings annually compared to our last copier contract. In addition, we received some very positive reviews for our new copier vendor. 8.11, the Copy Center Slitter, Cutter, and Creaser. This is another piece of equipment to replace aging stock in our copier center. 8.10, data backup upgrade. This new vendor and new contract will upgrade our data backup equipment now and again in 49 months. I believe these are servers that we're talking about.
Correct, yeah.
And the cost increases on $21.87 a month. Again, Randall does a really great job getting the equipment we need to protect our infrastructure, our technology infrastructure, and he's always got budget on his mind, which I really admire about him. And that is all I have for finance.
Any comments? Questions?
On that or extra stuff?
We can move to extra stuff. Anybody have anything extra? Go for it.
Thank you. I just received a call before the meeting tonight from the Norwood Together Community Engagement Committee. They're interested in passing out chalk at the school lunch thing. That would be a great way to reach kids where they are coming to get something. And organize a sidewalk chalk art event with prizes. And so I told her, contact Roger Kipp, contact the principals, here's all their numbers, here's all their emails, yada, yada, yada. She said, well, I would like to have the blessing of the board. I said, well, I'm about to go to the meeting. I will tell them all about it.
I think it'd be fun, since we didn't get to do our art event this year, if we could do a sidewalk art event and have kids send in their photos.
Well, and I think they would go around and take the pictures too.
Yeah.
That sounds lovely.
It does.
I think it'd be really cool.
All right, we're on it then.
I'm for it.
I'll let her know. If you're watching the show, they're on it.
So get your chalk.
Anybody else have anything for the group? No. With that, and I know we've got something else right after this, so I will adjourn. We are adjourned.